Liss, can you perhaps just introduce yourself? Tell us who you are.
Yes. So the reason I'm in Korea right now is twofold. So first of all, I am a clinical psychologist and also an associate professor in psychology at the University of Stavanger, where I teach mainly psychology across various degrees that we have there. And I'm here to do some collaboration and explore Korea from a research point of view. My main area of research right now is maternal depression, and I've become kind of more and more interested in how the experience of new mothers is intertwined with the expectations that society has of new mothers, which of course new mothers will internalize that. And I wanted to visit somewhere that was just completely different from Norway, a little bit exotic, and where also they have similar problems with, a low birth rate, and they're a very high functioning country economy-wise, but culturally speaking, it's quite different when it comes to feminism, motherhood, what's expected of women. So that's the one side of it, and the other side of it is that I am actually born in Busan and an adoptee. So I was adopted to Norway when I was a tiny baby. I don't remember anything, and I've never been back. Because, I studied abroad, I went on exchange, I did my PhD, I have 2 kids, 2 cats, some fish, and also apparently a husband. He's like so far down the list, he doesn't really figure poor guy. I love him very much. And so, all these things have always kind of like pushed visiting here backwards in my list of priorities. But then it just felt like the right time to come back, and I want to combine it with work so that maybe I can kind of build some connection to Korea through work and kind of have an excuse to come back more often. And I really loved coming back. It's been a really good experience, I think.
Wonderful. It's an amazing place to explore Korea for sure. Can we start perhaps with your research and postpartum depression and this, because I must confess I know very little about it.
I'm glad for you that you know little about it, because it can also happen to men. So that is kind of what we call a major depression that happens between or around or after the time that a woman has a child. And I say postnatal depression or postpartum, but you can also talk about peripartum, which means like around the time of birth. And most likely it has the same, a lot of commonalities with quote unquote normal depression. But I think that there are also some specific hormonal factors in creating that kind of experience, specifically in new mothers. And the interesting thing is, like, when you look at international studies, the prevalence rate is like 10 to 18%. But I've heard on the grapevine, like, it's super high in Korea. Obviously, it's not something they talk about so much, so numbers are a bit uncertain, but like up to maybe 30, 35, 40% of women have sort of significant symptoms of postpartum depression. And so the symptoms are similar to normal depression, so where the major symptoms are kind of low mood, or you can also be irritable, but also like loss of interest in activities that you would otherwise like. And, what is, I think, especially difficult with new motherhood is that the thing that you lose interest in or that you reject is usually to do with the child.
Wow.
So instead of kind of feeling that, this is an exciting, yes, it can be challenging, but it's an exciting change and you're kind of going to grow into it. You just wake up every morning and thinking, I didn't want this, I don't want to do this, I'm a horrible mom, my baby doesn't need me. And that is one of the reasons I wanted to look at it, because in Norway, it's like 1 of 6 women are affected by this. And I think if it's 1 in 6 women, that's a lot of women, right?
And that's the ones that confessed it. This must be incredibly hard for people to admit to, I think.
It's very, very shameful because, as I was saying, I became interested in how cultural expectations interact with maternal depression. And it's because there's this normative view of motherhood, meaning in Norwegian culture, and I think definitely also in Korean culture, it's seen as something that is like not only innate, but like it's an important part of being a morally upstanding woman. That once you like push this baby out, there's like a button that's switched on or something. You take this pill or something, and motherhood is kind of just switched on. It's just in you, waiting to be awakened by this lovely experience of birth.
I thought my life would change when we had children, and I realized it didn't, that I needed to change myself, that was quite interesting to me. When my wife gave birth, I thought this was going to be a pivotal moment in my life and the sky would open and a revelation would happen to me, and that didn't happen to me. It's something that I worked at, which was quite interesting. Postpartum, this research and people reporting it, is it quite new? I can imagine that people didn't talk about it much in the past, or?
Yeah, I think that there's quite a lot of research in postpartum depression in particular. So I wanted to find like an angle. And my angle is that I'm looking at experiences of baby wearing while depressed. So baby wearing is an American term, but it describes when you use a baby carrier to hold your baby.
Okay.
I'm sure you had baby carrier, especially if you had two that close together.
Yeah.
You probably needed to like carry one while you're like
changing
nappy of the second baby, right?
Yeah.
So any kind of carrier. And I wanted to look at that because I use them with my children, and I'm also a trained baby wearing consultant. And that means that, you know, when I was home with the youngest, who's now 11, I received people who actually paid me money to learn how to carry their baby safely. Because as you will also find in Korea, there's a lot of worry about, like, what if my baby suffocates or, like, their head falls off or I break them, you know.
Yeah.
But I think, like, if you've seen a baby actually being born, especially the way the nurses handle the baby after it's born, they're, like, throwing it around. I mean, you can't really break a baby very easily by carrying it. But at any rate, so I worked with that for a while, just on like a hobby basis kind of. And as a clinician, I realized that like a lot of the women who came to me for assistance with quote unquote baby carrying, they were actually depressed, right? Like they come in and they have just this like glassy look and, you know, gray face, and not just like, I didn't wash this week, gray mom face, but they're just drained, right? And quite often they have babies who are very unsettled and are just crying and crying and crying. And that is, you know, just neurologically speaking, we react to that. And it's just exhausting to have that going on 24/7 for weeks on end. And something happens when you put quite a lot of unsettled babies, when you kind of wrap them up tightly, you know, and you just wrap them in a blanket, that kind of calms them, because I think it reminds them of being in the womb, especially during, you know, what we call the fourth trimester, like the 3 first months after birth. So what would happen when these people would pay me good money, I put them in like a baby carrier and I would say, okay, so the baby's still crying, right? And the mom is like dissociating almost. And I'd be like, okay, so the baby's in there, he's safe and sound. So can you just go outside my house now and walk around the house 3 times? Because of course in Norway, everyone has a house with a garden. And they would go outside, and what happens first is that the air is quite cool usually. So the baby's like, this is like a different environment. And babies' brains are quite slow and stupid. So they process slowly. So this new impression of cool air, then that usually makes them shut up for 10 seconds anyway. And by the time they remember that they were screaming, the mom is already moving, right? And 3 rounds around the house, and they all come, like, I did say like 87% of the time they would come in, they go like, the baby is asleep. I can't believe it. This is the first time it's ever happened. And, you know, just like, it's like a weight falling off their shoulders. Like suddenly there's 5 minutes of peace, or they realize they have this tool that they can use to provide for their baby, but also to provide for themselves. Because, you know, as a father of 2, you know what it's like when they've screamed, both of them have screamed for 7 hours, and you just want to throw them out the window or throw yourself out a window, but you can't, because that would be lethal and also illegal. So from those experiences, I thought there must be something that we can do to help more people access this. But then I want to check out, like, is that only something that I think is a thing, because I'm a baby wearing nutcase myself. I'm not going to tell you how much I spent on hand woven carriers and stuff.
Do you do baby wearing at the front? Because in Korea, it's a lot tied onto the back.
Yes,
with
I saw
towels.
my first potagi today, actually. There was this like halmoni with like a little baby. And I actually stopped. I was like, excuse me, can I take a picture of you?
What did she say?
And she was like, yes. And
lovely.
She like, but she like turned around because I think she thought I specifically wanted a picture of the baby.
You wanted a picture of the baby on the grandmother's back. On the grandmother's back as well, not the mother's.
Yeah, very clearly grandma.
Yeah.
I was quite a little baby, maybe like 5-6 months.
Koreans have been doing it because when I first saw it, just wrapping babies in a towel and wrapping it round, it looked a little bit unsafe. And what are you meant to do that? But they do it with such calmness, and they do it with such skill and ease that this is the way you do it. It seems they're not always strapped into something, but just put on the back.
Okay, so what I'm going to say now is going to be less obvious to the people who are just listening to this in audio.
Yeah.
But you'll just have to go to the video podcast to watch what I'm doing with my hands. So basically, there's something called Japanese strap carrier. It probably has a Japanese name that I've forgotten. Yeah. But this strap carrier, all it does is it kind of goes across the baby's back and then around the shoulders of the parent, and then underneath the baby's knees, and then around their waist, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, there's no fabric covering the baby's bum or like stupid head supports or anything like that. And that's kind of the basis of every carrier. You just need to hold the kid kind of close to your back, which is what the upper strap does. And then you need to hoist them up so they don't fall down. That's what the knee strap does. And so, these like podage, especially the modern ones, are quite often made of like quilted fabric. Yes. I think they're very, very safe.
Okay.
And as you say, like especially these Amones, they really know how to use them. Like it was like a pro wrap. I mean, it was very secure, I think.
Yeah, and the wrapping up of babies at a very young age, I don't know how it compares between England and Korea because I've only had children or been around children here, but they wrap them up. I just want to go back to this kind of postpartum depression thing and the spectrum of motherhood. You gave some figures about how prevalent it was, sort of, what was it, 10 to 18% or something like this?
In international studies,
Yeah. Does that mean sort of all motherhood is different? Because my question here is, what do people not really kind of recognize, maybe men or society in general, about motherhood that maybe needs to be made more aware of?
I did like a seminar for some anthropology master students at Yonsei. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
The other day, and one of the women who was there, she shared, that she thought she had been depressed, and she said exactly the same thing that you did, where she had this baby, and she was kind of led to expect that motherhood would somehow just blossom, and you would be someone else, right? But she was still herself, and she missed her old self. So it's like you still are yourself, but you can't access yourself anymore in a way. I don't know if maybe you recognize that as well. And then you have to move gradually towards building a relationship with this new human and finding yourself. And I think for some people, yes, there is this instant kind of rush of attachment and love, and it is instantaneous, but I think for a lot of people, and maybe the majority of people, it's something that builds over time. So, in some cultures where they have arranged marriages, they say that like romantic Western marriages are like a hot stove that goes gradually cold, whereas an arranged marriage is like a cold pot that you put on the stove and then it gradually heats up.
Okay.
And I think there's something to that. But I think that also it's kind of delirious to think that the meeting of this new human that can't even speak would be more instantaneous than meeting a romantic partner, right? Because yes, some people fall in love instantaneously, but also when you ask some people who've been successfully married for 35 years, they say, it developed over time, or, we met like 58 times over 2 years, we were colleagues, and I only realized after X amount of time that, something had grown, right? And I think there's something to that also in your relationship with your child, because it is actually it's a separate human being from you, and you have to learn how to know them, learn how to read them, and it takes time. And I think that's one of the most under-communicated aspects of motherhood. I'm also working tangentially with this amazing researcher from Arizona who's called Leela Rankin. And she just published a paper, I think last year in 2024, where she examined whether motherhood is quote-unquote innate. And her conclusion was that if you look at, a condensation of evidence on this, it most likely is not innate. It's something that we learn. Which brings me to Norway has a birth rate of 1.42, I think. And obviously Korea is 0.72 or something. It went up a little bit. Yeah, like you had 3 extra babies last year, right?
Yeah, it's going up again.
Yes, it's maybe going.
COVID's finished.
Yeah, it could also be just a random fluctuation, but it might be going up. But I think what happens when you have so few babies in society is that the opportunity to gradually ease into the idea of what it's like to care for another human being becomes completely transformed, right? Because like my daughter is 14 now, and she's barely handled a baby because, you know, nobody else has babies.
Right.
And I think here it's even more extreme. And these master students are all, you know, bright, lovely, middle-class probably students. Many of them are saying they've never held an infant in their entire life. And I think that makes it even harder because then all of your expectations of motherhood are from either, if you're middle class, books that you read to become a good parent or parenting classes, and none of it is actually visceral with experience with actual children. And I think becoming a parent is so visceral, even for you as a man, like the actual physicalness of changing nappies, wiping off baby spit up, or like washing bottles or bleeding nipples, you know, it's all body work.
Yes.
And I don't think you can learn body work from just watching it on YouTube.
And it's uncomfortable at first, and you realize you have to be doing all of these things and there's nobody else to do it for you. How is our relationship to children changing over time? Because when we sort of, I'm generalizing here and I'm probably wrong, but when we have larger families and, you know, you hope that a few children survive and get through, and that's why they have the 100-day celebrations here and things, because child mortality was high and these things. Is our attitude towards children changing and the relationship between parents and children changing over time? So a mother and a child is different today than it was, for example, 200 years ago, or is that a universal experience?
No, I mean, I think that in practical terms, there are maybe two main things that are different. So first of all, in the past, if you had like umpteen children, I think that the birth rate in Korea was like 7 or something, not even that long ago, like in the 70s. Whereas in Norway in the 70s, it was like already down to about 3. But so, yeah, if you're 1 out of 7 children, not only do you have 7 children, but your sister, who's 1 out of 8 sisters, also has 7 children. So the amount of like cousins and aunties around is massive. So whenever there's a new baby, you know, there's traditionally there's a sort of strong focus in Korea on mothers recovering after birth. So I'm just imagining that this recovery was being surrounded by other women who kind of supported you and also crucially were experienced in all the things that you had to go through. And I would also guess that breastfeeding wise, you know, you had like 85 lactating women around you. So if your milk hadn't come in, or, you know, they would just probably give the baby a feed on the go and then hand it off to the 12-year-old to carry around if the baby was crying, and you could get that bed rest, right? Whereas now when there's so few people, and something I guess happened also in Korea where kind of the nuclear family became, I don't know if it's become an ideal or if it's just kind of turned out to be the most common unit, but certainly that is a move that had happened. Then suddenly there aren't all those people around anymore. And then the second thing that has happened, I think, is when you have, as you say, like I said, umpteen babies, and you know that a lot of them are going to die. Some of them might live up. I don't think that the pain of losing a baby was less, because I think that is quite visceral as well when you lose a child. But it was a shared experience, because if you'd lost 2 babies, like, you know, most of your 8 sisters, they'd also lost some babies or some children. It's something that there was like a framework for handling in society, and it was, you know, sad, but it was a common experience. Whereas now you have 1 or 2 children, and, you know, in Korea increasingly 1, and everything is kind of channeled into this one child. And I think because the sort of idea of perfection, I'm guessing that arises from like Confucian ideas of moral perfection and physical perfection being quite of intertwined, right? That is also infused into the expectations on parents. And I think that it reaches some kind of threshold where the expected investment in a child becomes so high that most parents will feel that it's almost unattainable, right? Like, so some of these students as well, they were saying, I'm just worried that I will just try to make my baby as smart as it can be, because it's really important to have, you know, intelligent children. But like, what if I do it wrong? Or what if I can't do enough? What if I'm a bad mother? And I think that idea, like, what if I'm a bad mother, I don't think that it necessarily triggers maternal depression, but it certainly drives and maintains it. And the higher your expectations of you as an individual, like not your extended family, you as an individual, to make this one child succeed. I mean, the fall is so massive. And then when you have these hormones that make you feel absolutely shit, and you feel that you're failing, I think that those factors in society kind of drive also depression. So those two things that really change. Your network is gone, and also the expectations of your parenting have risen. So actually the gap between the resources there to support you and the expectations, the gap has widened, I think, enormously.
Has our education got better? Because when, you have children, there wasn't, I would imagine, a manual. There was a network, you say, this collection of people, but now perhaps it's, you go online, you read a book. I would imagine, but I might be wrong, that our education on psychology and parenting and training is getting better because we're more informed, we've got more research. I would imagine, and I might be wrong, that sexual abuse of young children and adults is getting better. We don't seem to spank or hit as much. That seems to have gone in society in general. Are we better educated than in the past?
I think yes. I mean, because, when I say that, everything was better in the olden days, it's not really the case. I don't know, how old are you? What year are you born?
I was born 81.
Okay, so you have also shared this experience that I've had from childhood where you were like in the back of in the trunk of your car, driving in the estate car without any belt on. We were just back there with like glass bottles of Coca-Cola, knocking our teeth out every time we went over a bump.
Was somebody smoking cigarettes like
the
uncle?
Of course, they were also smoking
on airplanes
inside the car
and restaurants
and everywhere. Yes, they in the 70s in Norway, hardly anyone breastfed. The breastfeeding rate was breastfeeding competency was like nil in society. And so, a lot of stuff has gotten better because we know now that breastfeeding is important. We know what a mother-baby friendly hospital is, and most of the birth wards in Norway are mother-baby friendly. That's like a WHO guideline on how to make them mother and baby breastfeeding friendly. And there's, a plethora of information about everything that you can imagine. But as I said, because childbirth is so visceral and childcare is so physical, it's not just a knowledge or competency, it's also a practical skill. And so even though we know a lot more now about how children function, I'm not sure that can entirely replace the practical learning that we had more of previously.
Is breastfeeding cultural? I would imagine that was just something. I mean, you said that Norway in the 70s breastfeeding wasn't a thing. I would have imagined it went the other way.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic because I just found out that Korean moms quite often go into like a mother and baby home after they give birth.
Yeah.
And they're expensive. So I guess like the richer you are, the more fancy the facility and the longer you can stay, maybe.
I was used to being in the United Kingdom and this idea that after 2-3 days, the NHS sends you home and good luck, off you go. And that was it. And another extension of that is I think it was the first time we flew British Airways with a young child, my son Edward, and going back from Korea to England. And this old air lady stewardess, she must have been in her 50s or 60s, she waddled down the aisle and she looked at me and my wife with our baby and she went, good luck. and that was it, as if off you go. Whereas in Korea, it's very different with the stewardesses on planes and they'll pick them up and carry them. But after my wife gave birth, she spent 2 to 3 weeks in a hotel. And what was interesting to me is like the nurses took the baby.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, this is what, and I trust my wife, this is what she wanted to do, and this was what the culture said, and people would come and sit with her, but she just got 2-3 weeks of recovery, and the baby would be brought up to feed and spend time and then taken back down, and she would do exercises and training to help her mental health and physical conditions, and it's quite interesting here. It's like a hotel for mothers.
Yes, also it's a lot like what Western hospitals were like in the 70s.
Really?
Because, what you have is the separation of the child from the mother and regimented feeding. And what we do know now is that regimented feeding practices kind of ruin what your body needs to produce milk. because babies need to be fed on demand, especially the first 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Milk production is demand driven, so the more the baby suckles, the more milk you make. After six weeks, it kind of changes and becomes more hormonally driven,
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of less vulnerable to feeding frequency, but you need that to kind of establish a good supply. And that was one of the reasons that breastfeeding rates were so low in the 70s in Norway, is because mothers would have quite long hospital stays, usually I think up to 2 weeks, and the nurses would have the babies at a nursing station where, when you see on like vintage films where they're looking through this glass and there's all these babies sleeping on the inside in their little cots.
I did that for real.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think in Korea there's some level of societal expectation that is part of being a good mother, is to kind of sort of attend to your own needs and your own recovery. And somehow that has got associated with not being kind of bogged down by baby care so much. But I think sort of medically speaking, you probably also know that one of the drivers of childbirth, but also breastfeeding, is oxytocin. It is hormone, and we call it love hormone, right? And oxytocin makes your smooth muscle contract. So basically, when you rub your baby on your front, that's where you have quite a lot of oxytocin-producing receptors. Like if you stimulate these receptors, you make oxytocin, and that makes your mammary glands push the milk out. Yep. But it also makes your uterus contract. So when you breastfeed, it helps the uterus contract faster, so that it kind of pushes out the bits that are still needing to be pushed out, and it helps you stop bleeding more quickly. And this happens more and more violently the more children you have, and it can be quite painful actually. But of course, that's quite important to stop bleeding.
Yes.
And so quite often after birth, you can have quite sort of painful contractions, right? But that's kind of a good thing, because it means your uterus is kind of going back to its normal pear size. I think it's crazy to think that the uterus is the size of like a European pear. And when you look at the size of the child that comes out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of contraction to be made, that's what I mean. And I think if you take children away very quickly, then you deprive the mother's body of that process.
So Korea is doing it wrong?
I'm not saying they're doing it wrong, but they are focusing on different aspects of recovery, I think.
What I and I'll probably be wrong here, so let's be wrong. As people give birth at an older age, as people get married later in their lives and they pursue careers, and it seems to be the motherhood age is going up, I would imagine recovery time is a lot harder on a woman who is in her mid to late 30s than it is in somebody in their late teens, early 20s.
Yes.
Right. So, but that's what I imagine. So because people are older as they go through these things, that the recovery for the mother is kind of important. I guess that's where the focus might be.
But I don't think that that's what's driving the kind of staying in hospitals. I mean, if I were to hazard a guess, I'm not an economist, but I would guess that it's twofold. First of all, that a need has been created for these institutions because of the focus on nuclear families over extended families. It was just Chuseok when we arrived, and I wanted to go to Busan to see my birth city with my family while I was still here. And of course, there were no train tickets.
Right.
And that's because everyone goes home for the holidays. But that also means that everyone lives away from home for the rest of the year, right? And so basically, because you have this kind of atomization of society, right? That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, you don't make any money if you send a woman home and just let her lie there with her boob out. Like breastfeeding is very cheap and free, and no one really makes much money out of breastfeeding women because, they kind of produce milk for free. But people make a lot of money out of women who aren't breastfeeding, and people make a lot of money out of medicalizing that period of life. And I'm not saying that this has consciously been thought of, but parents, we're talking about like parental anxiety in general. Like parents are an enormous market for people to make money from. And if you can kind of tap into insecurities that parents have and make certain kind of expenditure desirable, morally superior, a necessity, then it is literally a license to print money if obviously you can make women have more children, which seems to be a problem in Korea right now. But
can you call your next book capitalism versus the boob for me.
Yes.
Because that's what it feels like, that capitalism is taking away the woman with the boob out, as you say.
Yes, and I mean, the WHO has, guidelines for how baby milk can be marketed in maternity wards, for instance. And there's this sort of anecdotal story, which I think actually is true, of like a Nestle internal memo from the 80s. And it said, ensure that first foods are placed next to baby milks to avoid women drifting into homemade food when they're weaning, right? So, it's something that, because everyone wants the best for their child. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a bit like when we let Roblox into our children's bedrooms, right? We're letting in these enormous marketing companies to manipulate how our children want to spend their money. And it's the same thing with parenting. They just, they're tapping into the most important thing in our lives. And I know that sounds arrogant to people who maybe don't have children, but it feels like, it's such an enormous responsibility, and you want to do your best and you're willing to spend the money.
Can you maybe explore that idea? Because there are some people that want children that can't have children, and various different families and individuals, and respect to everybody. Is there a difference between parents and non-parents? Do we understand the world differently? And I'm thinking of this in terms of, if fewer and fewer people have children, will they take a different outlook on the world, on the future, on the economy, on the environment, because they're not as, and this might sound harsh, so I'm happy to be wrong, biologically, genetically invested in future generations? Or is that wrong?
I do think that mentally speaking, or intellectually speaking, for some people it makes a difference. For instance, if I didn't have children, it'd be much easier to think, well, I'm just going to fly on all the fancy overseas transatlantic holidays I want to go on because I want to go. But now, there is a little part of me thinking I should listen to Greta Thunberg, because actually I want this planet to outlast me. I want it to last for my children, for their children, and so on. But I think it's a little bit like, without pulling that like metaphor too far, it's a bit like trying to research suicide, right? Because you can only talk to the people who are survivors. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
yes, yeah.
It's always skewed, because with parents, you can't do an RCT. You can't like have the same person have children and see how they turn out, and not have children and see how they turn out. The funny thing is, when people who don't have children, they're like, well, you don't know what it's like to be an adult without children. So how can you know that your life, it changes? But the thing is that we do know. My husband was 40 years old when he became a father. He has 40 years of experience, or like 20 years of adult experience of being an adult without children, and what that was like, and what his values were like. And it does, I think, fundamentally change in a way which I think is not impossible, but difficult to understand if you don't have children, for the simple reason that having a child is one of the few responsibilities that are very hard to relinquish.
Yeah.
If I have a dog or a charity that I run with 85 orphans or whatever, I can always choose to step away, legally speaking. But legally speaking, it's very hard to give up your child once they're past a certain age. And I mean, I'm saying that as an adoptee. So obviously I know that you can give up your child. But I mean, once you've kind of committed to doing it, you've kind of committed to doing it. And I think the weight of that, like the sort of societal expectations around that, transform you somehow. Yeah.
For me, it's experiencing your heart existing outside of your body, or something. Your most vital organ or piece is no longer internal, but external. And it creates a very different, and I picture the world in, 20, 30, 40 years. And I hope it's a nice world, a good world. And I try to do as much as I can to ensure the needle gets pushed in the right way, however that might be, not necessarily for myself, because I might not be here to see it, but for my children. And I think it provides meaning. People like Nietzsche and Viktor Frankl have talked about having meaning, and the meaning, if the meaning is just yourself, things can become hard. But if you said, well, you go and do this for your grandmother or for your children, okay.
Yeah.
It becomes easier to do hard things for other people.
I agree. And I don't think that you can, that like, having no children precludes that.
Yeah.
But I just think that when you're a parent, it's much more difficult to turn away from that kind of attitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also you're right that that's quite often something I talk about in clinic, because I don't think I mentioned it, but I'm also a clinician. I have a lot of people who kind of feel that they don't have any direction, and sometimes when they've been with me for a while, I try to kind of nudge them or encourage them or explore with them. Well, what if you try to find something that's greater than yourself that you can be invested in? And I'm not saying become like an evangelical Christian, which seems to be quite an easy thing to become in Korea if you want to. Like, I've been approached so many times. I must have one of those faces. But you're just something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
Like, get engaged in like the local animal shelter, or, you know, try to gather some funding for Gaza, or do something, you know. And I think when you have children, you get a little bit of that for free. I mean, not for free, for a cost, but you get that without having to consciously make a choice.
Yes,
Yeah.
I completely agree. And a lot of the culture does tell us to focus on ourselves and to make ourselves happy. And at the same time, that results in a lot of unhappiness and sadness. And maybe the Taoists were right about all of this. If we talk about cultural expectations in society, can you perhaps say something about cultural narratives and good motherhood and these kind of things? We touched on perfection earlier here in Korea, and this idea of Confucianism, and we might be going on to stories rather than scientific analysis, but I'm wondering how you feel about Korean motherhood versus Norwegian motherhood. What is Korean motherhood, or how does culture work? Hegemonic?
First of all, as you say hegemonic, but I'm thinking like in terms of hierarchy.
Okay.
This society is much more hierarchical in many ways, right? And when I've been visiting these university professors, you know, their students are so deferential to them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's a very different thing. Where like I think Norwegian students are a bit like American students, and they're so full of their own rights. It's like coming out of their ears, sometimes out of my ears.
It's very easy to teach here in Korea.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yes, because people want to do well. But I was just handed this leaflet actually in Central Seoul today about enlisting women to work. Because I guess only 60% of Korean women work, which is very low compared to the OECD average of about 80%. And that also includes mothers. But I'm guessing that if you look at it only mothers, it's much, much lower. And on one hand, yes, you're expected to give up your career or at least put it on pause. But I think also that a lot more women want to do it. But I think that also the societal expectation, which might be internalized, is much bigger. Like in Norway, it's the other way around. We're not that many people. We're like 5.5 million people in the entirety of Norway. And it's kind of expected of you that you work. So I think it's like 86% of women work or something, and 82% of mothers. So most people work, and most of them work at least 80% or maybe full time. And, you know, that's kind of good and bad. If you're just at home with your child, then you have fewer things to juggle in a way. But I think that also it gives a lot of economic insecurity. And I know that there's been talk here about, you know, problems with domestic violence, for instance, which also is a problem everywhere where you have married women and men. But I think that it's almost impossible to step away from a violent relationship, even given the economic framework to do so. And if you don't have the economic framework to step away and be a single mother, then it must be so much harder. I think that in the US, like data show that the average number of times a woman tries to leave before she manages to leave is 7 times. You try to leave 7 times before you manage to leave. And in the US as well, like a lot of women have economic independence. And I'm thinking that most likely plays a role in making women's lives different. Then also when there are so few women who have children, I think that the risk of loneliness is higher. Because when my mom was at home with us, and she was actually unusual in staying home with me, even in the 80s, I think it was because, you know, I'm adopted, and she just desperately so much wanted children that when she finally managed to have them, which took years, you know, she was just like, I'm just gonna retire for a number of years and stay home with my kids. But there were loads of women who not necessarily didn't work, but a lot of them were like private daycare workers. They had like a mini daycare at home because we're so many kids, right?
Yeah.
And so I think if you don't have that, then that also increases the risk of isolation and loneliness as a mother. It's so funny. I was buying noodles to go home and have for dinner in my Airbnb, and I went to this just one like little street stall run by Najoma, and she makes lovely noodles. And I was sitting there waiting for my noodles, and there was this Korean woman with her husband whom I don't think spoke English, but she spoke quite good English. And she was just like, "Excuse me, you look so hungry." And I was like, "Yes, that's why I'm here ordering noodles." And she was like, "Oh, you must have some of my pancakes, because it will be 10 minutes and you already look very hungry."
How hungry did you look?
I mean, you've only seen me from my waist up, but I'm not skinny. But I guess I just had that like grey face of low blood sugar. And she was just very chatty. And I was like, "Oh, so what are you doing here?" And she was like, "Oh, both of my kids go to school here." And it was like 7 in the evening. And she's like, "I just sent them home." And I was like, "Okay, so, and she said, because I'm just staying at home with kids," but she's like, they're like 12 and 14. So you're not at home with kids, you're at home by yourself all day. And I think she just really wanted to chat to someone. Obviously I was also very happy about the pancakes, but they were really tasty. But I think, when there are fewer moms to stay at home with, that also does something very socially. But I think that when I only observe kids here, that usually they seem very harmonious. And I think that's a positive thing, that, they know that they're loved, they know that they're wanted, and they have so much adult attention. And I think they're encouraged to kind of follow their dreams and become their best self. And I think that probably gives you a very good opportunity to have a positive relationship potentially with your child, even though I heard that also Asian mothers nowadays say "I love you," which they didn't used to before. Yeah.
That's changing. We'll talk about that a little bit. What I've noticed interesting in sort of a foreign fathers group in Korea that I'm part of, and it's been said that if I walk down the street with my 2 kids, old ladies or aunties, imos, halmonis, they'll come up to the kids and touch them and look at, and they'll say, "Our kids are beautiful," and they'll use that language and touch them, or if they're not wrapped up nicely and warmly, they'll do this. And that's seen as natural to these people. And I've seen some foreign fathers and maybe mothers as well saying, "Don't touch my children. What the hell are you doing?" And there is this, this love of children that I see amongst Korean people, and almost as if they're our children. And there is part of me that wants to say, "No, I pay for these children. I raised them.
I made them."
Exactly.
Go make your own.
But there is that warm feeling I see when I take my children out and people see them and love them and respond positively to them. And I see that in my day-to-day life more than I see no kid zones and bad treatment, which makes the news, but I don't see that in my day-to-day life. I see affection towards children.
I also felt that when my kids were here for 2 weeks before they left last Sunday, and we went to one of these Korean barbecue restaurants, and my husband is incredibly Norwegian looking. He's like 192 tall, he has a beard, he's super blonde, right? So easy to find him here because I can just look around, he sticks out like a sore thumb. But anyway, so they could obviously tell we were clueless, so I think that we got like a lot of extra service where they were like, grilling the meat for us and like showing us like which dipping sauce goes with which food. But at any rate, like several times, like the ajumma running the place, they would kind of, roll up some food for my youngest, who's 11, he's not a baby, and then like feed it to him.
Yeah.
And I think that also is just expressive of how much they appreciate children. And we went to this hot pot place and had a Korean hot pot with dumplings, and they had these amazing like jumbo kimchi dumplings with like pork and tofu. They were so good. But at any rate, they looked at this pale, because he's so white, this pale child who's quite young, and they probably thought he doesn't like spicy food, which is not correct. Like, he's a spicy food eater out of them. But anyways, they gave him all of the non-spicy dumplings, just like piled them on his plate. Then they divided like the big spicy dumplings between the 3 other people at the table. So I think there's just, everywhere we went, I also had this impression that it is a very child-friendly place, and I see also children in the streets a lot. They they're not on their screens all the time. Like, they're out cycling in groups and out playing sports, or they seem very relaxed and kind of free, which kind of surprised me a little, because in the UK you're barely allowed to like breathe outside on your own if you're a child, and let alone in the US. It's even, in Norwegian terms, worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also must be tied into people respecting children and like this idea that we're collectively looking after them when they're out in the streets. They're kind of still cared for, even though they're not within kind of the line of sight of the parent, right?
And the streets are generally safe out here, and there's no kind of really dodgy areas that I've not seen any Korean chavs.
Oh my God, like obviously we didn't mean anything bad by that term. Right?
But you know what I mean? But I mean,
I know exactly what you mean.
The playgrounds are safe and clean, and they are in many parts of the world as well. Let's not just say that it's not true. But just on the pancakes and things like that, I've had strangers give my kids money.
Oh, wow.
You know, just come up and here you go. And there is that kind of chong, that gift giving, and that's how you show affection. But it is safe for children to go outside here.
Yeah.
What's interesting is what you describe is very different from how people might perceive Korea through media or through the internet and through stereotypes. And every experience is different and should be respected. But what you're saying is it's almost positive.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just imagining this. It might not actually be even a sort of good observation, but I thought of that old dystopian movie. I think it's called District 47 or 52
the South
or something.
African one.
Yes, the South
fucking
African.
prawns. Yeah, fucking prawns. It's a South African swearing about aliens, isn't
yes,
it? District 47, 49.
Is there something in that film about not being able to have children, or am I mixing it up with some other dystopia?
I can just remember someone swearing in a South Afrikaans accent about prawns. So forgive me.
It's difficult to look past that, right? Okay, but anyway, no. I think it's a different film, but some film where humans have stopped having the ability to have children. And it's not The Handmaid's Tale, but some other dystopia along those lines. And yes, but I think that what happens in a society, and I think this is true, that they become child starved. And I don't mean to like over romanticize children because they're noisy, dirty, annoying. But there is also something that is incredibly, I think, hopeful about small children. And it's not that they are innocent, because they're not, but they're new to the world and they see the world with new eyes, right? And they're experiencing everything as if it's new and wonderful, because it is new and wonderful to them. And I think that we need that perspective. And there's something in a society with few children that kind of is drawn to that. And in Korea, they are openly embracing that. I think that the childness is something that is appreciated. And even if you look at, I'm sure that you can probably say a lot of negative things about the idea that like youthfulness is also very highly valued in the culture. But I think some aspect of that is tied to valuing what a child is. And to be able to kind of come into the world like a child. That sounded very Christian. And I think that, what we're describing is partly happens because people have so few children. So when you actually see some out on the street, it touches something in people. And maybe especially, older people that remember society or remember being around a lot of kids when they were kids. My friend, she'll forgive me for mentioning it, she has 4 kids. So they had 2, and then they were like, we're going to have a 3rd, and then they had twins. So anyway, she took all these 4 kids, who are also very white, to Japan. I think, was it this Easter or last year, recently? And it was the same, they were like a spectacle, and people like adore these. And her kids are also really good looking, so that helps. But they adore these kids, because of course Japan is also kind of super aging. But I think there is something in a society with few children that makes these few children that are there some kind of attention magnet, because it touches something in people.
I look at children differently since being a father, becoming a father. When I see other children in the street, I smile at them, or I wave at them, or I poke my tongue out at them and see if they respond, and these things, which I think I would have been a little bit more hesitant or afraid to do. Like I'm not a paedophile, honest, but now I do have children, and I know how they work a little bit. I'm far more comfortable, and I take joy out of seeing other children. They have Children's Day here.
Yes,
in the UK, we have Mother's Day and Father's Day, and that's it. And I get really confused when sort of American people might put in a group chat, guys, don't forget it's Mother's Day. And then I suddenly panic and realize American Mother's Day and English Mother's Day is different. But they have Children's Day here.
Yeah,
a day to celebrate children.
Yeah, I heard. And does that mean they get in for free to museums and stuff?
They get in for free. And it's capitalism, of course, because you've got to buy all the presents for children. But it's literally a day when children are rewarded and all of these things.
I like that. And, it's nice that it's kind of specifically a Children's Day. In Norway, I think the closest thing we have is the National Day, which is our Independence Day. Or it's not actually even our Independence Day, it's our Constitutional Day. So it celebrates the day when Norway got its first constitution, which is like 20 minutes ago pretty much, because we were colonized by Sweden and Denmark so long. That's, I think, why I like, on a level, I relate to Korea, because they were also colonized, for such a long time, until very recently, and then occupied during the war. But at any rate, so when they made this Independence/Constitutional Day, they decided to make it a Children's Day. So a lot of people on their Independence Day, they have like military parades or, politicians making boring speeches. But what we have is like a children's parade.
Nice.
So we force all the children to wear their best national costume, drive them out in the street at 7 a.m, and then they have to like walk around shouting hooray for our freedom, which I think becomes more and more abstract because, the kids alive now, they can't remember the war even. So...
what part of the year? When is it?
It's on the 17th of May, so it's
perfect in the
perfect
perfect weather.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's either freezing or it's amazing, right? Yeah.
It's nice to celebrate children. This kind of turns the conversation a little bit weirder, but South Korea, when we look at its birth rate, it also has a low birth rate, fertility rate, but it also has very few teenage pregnancies, relatively, like very low. It's right at the bottom with Japan, and very few single mother pregnancies. There was a Japanese celebrity who, suddenly I've forgotten her name. Please forgive me. It begins with an S. But she sort of had I'm not sure, like an IVF baby. She wasn't married or anything like this,
sure.
but and she did that, and there was a bit of pushback against her for doing this. It might just be because she's Japanese and Koreans didn't like it, but this is quite interesting to me culturally, that there are very few teenage mothers here, and there are very few single mothers here. And that's not to say single mothers are good or bad. My mother was a teenager when she had me, and
look how you turned out. I mean,
no problems. But does that do anything to a culture that children are born generally in wedlock to people in there?
At least I think to a greater extent it means that most children are planned, doesn't it? And I mean, I don't really want to go into the sort of entire politics of adoption because I think it's so it's a little bit inflammatory, but obviously there has been the part of the enormous export of children has been related to the fact that it's also undesirable to have single mothers and teenage mothers, right? And they had somewhere to put them because I think when they constructed childcare services or social services for children in difficult situations in Korea, a big part of the solution, for whatever reason, became to just take these children and like pretend they didn't exist and ship them off somewhere. And I mean, I've had an incredibly good life in Norway, which is kind of why I'm reluctant to discuss it too much.
I didn't realize this question would go into that. That wasn't my intention,
but I think like for Koreans specifically, I think it says, yes, there have been like market forces in place that have earned money on this and all these kinds, and they had the war, but there must also be something in the culture that encourages mothers to give up babies that are born out of wedlock, because there are so many other countries as well who have had this the same situation with a war or a colonizer or poverty and all these, and none of them have managed to export as many children as South Korea. And I think that just is testament to a lot of things, but it is also testament to the fact that it's so undesirable, and it has been always been very hard for single mothers. But I also think that nowadays young women are eschewing romantic partnerships a lot in general. And, if you don't have a boyfriend and if you don't believe in sex before marriage, because it's quite a conservative country in many, like sexually conservative in many ways, then you don't make so many babies. And I don't know anything about structure for giving out like free contraceptives or like what sex education is like. I don't know anything about that. But when people have fewer sexual partners, they make fewer babies. And I think also the idea of perfectionism and planning everything, and that means that they also do think very carefully about whether to have a baby or not.
I'm not sure whether South Korea is sexually conservative these days or not. When I and I'm only viewing this from a position where I am, but I wonder if it's affected by, when I was at university, we'd go and live in houses in a different town, and you'd live in a shared house with 4 or 5 people of different sexes and things like this. And of course, let's go. That was what university was about. Yes, almost. Here, people are still, in general, they're still kind of living at home and still studying, and that affects things, I think.
Yeah, no, but they have love motels.
Yeah, it was DVD banks, now it's love motels, and there's horny people all around the place.
Yeah, I mean, if they want to go and do it somewhere, there's space for that. But but I think you're right also that, like, I not only did I study abroad, so I studied in Scotland when I did my first degree before I became a psychologist. But
whereabouts
also
in Scotland?
In Stirling.
Okay,
yes.
I wasn't expecting that.
It's the university with the highest suicide rate in the UK at the time.
And you survived?
Yes, I have a very bright outlook on life. But then I also went on exchange from Stirling to University of California. And then you're like just surrounded by everyone who's a foreign student. And I mean, if it wasn't for contraception, there would be so many babies, because everything you do, I think when you move out from home and you're in, especially if you're like in this kind of student environment, that whole time of your life is a bit like Vegas. Like what happens there stays there.
Yeah.
And it's also very normal to just do, to have slight transgressions towards norms in society, right?
When you're on holiday, it's different.
It's like being on holiday. Yeah.
And I guess like maybe as a society, we're having fewer babies but more sex. That might not be true. But with the rise of contraception and morning after pills and abortions and all of people having autonomy over their own bodies, where in the past sort of sex was a dangerous thing because if you had sex, that might be your whole life fundamentally changed.
Although, I don't remember the details, but I do think that like Korean laws on abortion are relatively strict still. Not like Irish strict.
They legalized it about 3 years ago.
Exactly. I mean,
as far as I understand.
very recent.
I know, and it came through doctors, but they had one of the highest abortion practices that was done, and it was all done illegally, and it wasn't human rights or something that did this. The doctors, as far as I understand, basically said, we're tired of breaking the law. We refuse to do this anymore, so you better change. And so it wasn't because they didn't want to listen to the people, and it wasn't the government that did it, but it was the doctors with power and influence saying, we're tired of becoming criminals here.
But I think that's also very interesting to think that, they have such a high abortion rate because people who are, who think that abortion is inherently problematic, I think that they quite often aren't aware of how difficult abortions can be for a woman psychologically. I mean, it's just not a choice taken lightly for the vast majority of women, unless I don't count the morning after pill in that, but if you have an established known pregnancy and to terminate that is not, and I've never met anyone who takes that lightly. And it's something that people come into therapy for a lot, where it could have been even like a super early abortion where it was like a 7-week abortion where technically speaking it's been in your actual uterus for like a month, right? But people still think about it 20 years on. So I think when people make that decision frequently, then it's interesting to try to imagine what makes them make that difficult choice, because then there must be other things that are seen as even less desirable.
What is desirable for a mother or society, for a place like Korea, in terms of healthy social laws and culture for what a woman should be, and a man and a father as well, of course, but what should they be allowed? Where do you see this? So in terms of abortion, contraception, days after pill, sort of magic days, they call them here, being able to take days off from work or university legally without any repercussions. What does a good structure legally and politically and culturally look like for women?
I mean, I would like to point to Scandinavia, but then on the other hand, our birth rate is also low, right? But I do think that it helps to have a good maternity leave. So in Scandinavia, usually it's divided between the mother and the father. So the mom has some weeks and the dad has some weeks. And in Norway, there's also like a third chunk of weeks that can be distributed as you wish. And moms and dads tend to argue about who gets what out of those.
How long roughly is it? And is it full pay?
You can choose between 49 weeks of full pay or 58 weeks of 80% pay.
What, you get a year of work paid?
Yes. I mean, just go and make more. It is so amazing. I mean, wow. I couldn't stay home for long myself, but...
Why couldn't you? Was that you felt restless?
It's just me as a person. Like, I went back to work when the kids were like 4 or 5 months in both cases, part-time. Because then what you can do is you can do a gradual coming back to work. So I started working 1 or 2 days a week, and my husband would be home 1 or 2 days a week, and then we would kind of just make it last as long as we could, the leave. But then I think I just mentioned the second part there. I think that there has to be a gradual change over time to ensure women are being supported as parents, including by their men. And it's not just the childcare, it's, the entire third shift of knowing your child's boot size and knowing the name of their pediatrician and keeping on top of everything. And then I think thirdly, that maybe we need to lower the expectations of parenting a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, do we really need to hothouse our children into becoming superhumans, or can they just be like mediocre, happy people, and that's enough? And I think in Korea as well, there's some way to go to structure the possibilities for women to come back into work or to work while having children if they wish to do so. Because, I said I was handed these leaflets about getting more women into work in Seoul, and I read them with Papago, so it's probably like greatly translated, but nowhere in there did it mention, we will help you to see how you can arrange childcare while you are working, right? Because that is something that is really important to women. I think it's difficult to relax at work if you don't know that your children are taken care of, or... So I think that obviously is intertwined with how the non-birthing parents also help care for the infants. But I think it's just such a long process, and I think it's difficult to understand when you look at Korea now how new the country is in many ways. I mean, of course, it's ancient, but also like building itself as democracy. Building itself as like a liberal democracy, and as you say, like attitudes to sex in general have changed, attitudes to gender. I mean, that's all happened pretty much in my lifetime, and like the latter part of my lifetime. And these things just don't happen quickly. So I think to have an open conversation about what women want, and being willing to give women space to have opinions and say what they need, they're most likely able to tell you what they need if you are willing to listen to them.
How do you feel attitudes towards gender seem to be here in Korea at the moment? As a woman visiting, speaking to the people here, obviously Western Europe and Scandinavia is very different. How do you see men and women's relationship and gender playing out in Korean society?
I was a little surprised when I flew in here because our KLM was cancelled again. Yeah, I mean that's what KLM does. Like they screw up flights.
I could feel the venom in that. Yeah, again. Yeah.
So anyway, but we rebooked to Korea Airlines, and when I was walking through, the front expensive part of the plane, it was all men. And I remember when I started...
Passengers or students?
Yeah, the passengers.
Sorry,
the passengers were all men, like in the sort of businessy section.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started flying for work, 20 years ago, that was maybe more the case also in the UK or in Norway. But now when I fly, there's much more of an even distribution between men and women in the front of the plane. And that's not scientific, but I think that indicates something about something, right? But the way that I feel that I've been met personally, with nothing but respect, I really think that people have been super nice and friendly. And the professor that I was lecturing for this week, it was a woman who has no children, but she's a woman. And the students are so respectful to her, and there were male students there as well. So I think that there are probably certain sections of society where it's harder to be a woman.
Yeah.
I know that like the leadership percentage of women in like the big companies here is like minuscule. There's probably like one token woman somewhere. It's like there's the same number of women as there are minorities. There basically aren't any. And that takes time to change as well. It's going to take decades to change. So it'll be interesting to see if they manage to turn it around in a way that makes families want to have more children.
Mm-hmm. There was, and it is changing. It's really important, I think, to remember how kind of patriarchal and this was a military base until
exactly.
the late 80s. It's only been a very short time that it's been a democracy and a liberal democracy at that, but also there's a cultural lag and it takes time for attitudes and values to change, and Korea does always change. In terms of what happens, there was this big focus on having sons from male lineage for Chesa and Chale and laying these out. But there was a shift recently into 달바보.
Oh.
Like you want to have a girl.
Oh, right.
Because if you're only going to have like one kid,
yes.
the girl's more likely to take care of you when you're old and be sensitive to. I know this sounds very sexist.
True.
my wife
shows that's true.
Yeah, good. I'm glad I'm not in trouble for that. Whereas the son is more likely to go away and start his own family and not look back. And so there has been a preference, and now women are being born in greater prevalence, just slightly, but they're outnumbering men in terms of being born, graduating further, performing higher on tests. And it's almost like I wonder what this will look like 20, 30 years when this generation grows up, because there's more women being born, they're outperforming at school, and there is a shift somehow.
I think you'll have the same thing that you have in the Western countries, where you have a lot of men who feel rightfully or unrightfully extremely disenfranchised, and that can create a lot of tension, I think. And I think it's important to, even though, I want to dismiss the actual viewpoints they have, where they feel that they're somehow entitled to have sex with a woman.
That's a bold pickup line, isn't it?
Yeah. Sleep with me, I feel entitled. So sexy. No, but I think we have to take their feeling of marginalization seriously. Yeah. And I think that, when you have the demographic shift that you mentioned, the same thing is likely to come here, but, 20, 30 years down the road, maybe. I think also when we were talking about, the sort of the fact that you have to have time to have a cultural shift, we went to the DMZ when we arrived here because my husband is a historian.
The DMZ, I like that. Not the DMZ, the DMZ.
Yes, that's because I've grown up with a paper A to Z, so it's like burned in my brain.
Love it.
But yeah, anyway, and we had a really good guide. He was a native Korean, but I think he probably studied in Australia, judging from his accent. I recommend everyone go on a guided tour with him. He was so interesting. And his grandfather came from North Korea, and it was just before Chuseok. And he was talking about how they used to come to the DMZ to do their rituals at the altar, because that was kind of the closest that his grandfather could get to his family. And I think that there's this enormous cultural trauma, like collective trauma from that division. And he was saying that, he feels that it's one of the things that makes it painful for him now is that young people, he was in his 30s, but, people who are like Generation Alpha and younger, they don't even know anyone who came from North Korea. So it's completely abstract from them. And he felt that was adding to his own trauma, that it's being forgotten, and the idea of reunification is no longer has the same popular tractions. It's being given up. But I think that when you look at like all the hardship that Korea has been through, despite this enormous economic success and growth, I think that trauma has also been a reason to kind of hold on to some cultural things, because they were what you had, right, in the face of a very sort of threatening and insecure political situation. And I think to unlearn what I think is like a cultural trauma response almost, and kind of to trust the system and trust the state, I mean, that's going to take generations, right?
Yeah, because the state would put you in prison. The state was something to be feared. The state carried out violence on people until very recently.
It also didn't go so well for the president here last year, I heard.
Yeah. It doesn't go well for any presidents. Like, good luck to the current one, but that's what happens. As a clinician, as a psychologist, is collective unconscious trauma real? I know it's a ridiculous question, but I have some people that would look at me and say these kind of things are Orientalist, or that, it's not grounded in science. And other people, they speak very emotionally, and like there is this pathological, unresolved collective trauma that has gripped Korea for nations.
Sure. And I think physiologically speaking, okay, so I'm now talking about animal models. So we're quite far out there. But there are animal models of addiction that show that if you have a grandmother mouse who's made to get addicted to heroin or cocaine, because you can addict mice.
To heroin?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But cocaine, I think, is more efficient because it lasts shorter, right? And like rats will push a lever over 400 times to get one shot of cocaine. So anyway, if you manage to addict a grandmother mouse, right, then her grandchildren are more susceptible to cannabis seeking behavior. So, because if you think about it, when a woman is born, right, she has all of her eggs already in her ovaries. Right, you're born with all the eggs you'll ever have.
Was that right?
Did you not know that?
I did not know that.
That's a fascinating female fact, right? Yes, when you're born, you have all the. And then one egg at a time each month from either side matures into like a proper egg. But you have like the kind of seeds to the egg. They're all in your body, and that's why we run out of good eggs towards the end of our life, because our body uses up all the good eggs, and then it doesn't produce any eggs while you're alive. They're all there when you're born. So anyway, this grandmother mouse, when she has the mommy mouse, that mommy mouse fetus inside her already has her eggs inside her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, yeah.
So when something happens to this grandmother mouse, which is pretty dramatic for the body, then it probably changes her, the mouse that she's carrying, that she's pregnant with. And she also has the third generation inside her. So I think physiologically speaking, there is something to be said that it could make, if you're traumatized in various ways over time, it changes you physiologically, like it affects your brain chemistry and your hormones, everything. So I don't think that you have to be so mysterious about it necessarily. But if you think that you've had like an entire generation of women who've been malnourished, stressed, like to a large extent maybe subjected to physical violence or sexual violence, then that does stuff to the children that they carry. And that children they carry already carry the grandchildren seeds, right? So I think it can last at least for that long. Just this is speculative, but that is, a medical fact that, you have 3 generations alive at once because of that's how egg cells are made, basically.
I've had Robert Sapolsky on my podcast, the Stanford professor.
Wow.
And
I'm humbled to be in the same room as him. Was it in here?
He wasn't in here, but it hurt my brain. I was kind of nervous speaking to him, but, he says that there's no free will. He says that we're determined, we're programmed, and all the things that happen to, and I'll get my terminology wrong, forgive me, but a child in the womb and during that gestation, and all of that adds up and creates who we are. And that we essentially don't have much free will. And so what our grandmothers were doing and what our mothers were doing. And for a lot of Korean people, they were living through poverty. Like the people today, their grandmothers might have been living through poverty without education and sanitation, but also the spectre of communism and dictatorship and bad education and sexual violence. And that's still kind of carrying on today. That's very interesting that it takes time to resolve these things.
Yeah. I think it takes time to resolve physiologically, and then I think there is something to do with your physiology. I think that's overly deterministic, but
he's very deterministic.
Slightly, but that there is a grain of truth in that the way that your brain physiology is, if we use that as just like an enormous overgeneralization of brain complexity, is likely to predispose you to make certain forms or certain decisions easier, right? So for instance, like how easily you're activated or your temperament might predispose you to make certain forms of decision instead of others. But I think that it is slightly far-fetched to say that everything is determined. Yeah. But he's still an interesting person.
Oh, absolutely. What a legend.
Yeah.
I was like, when I got emails from him, I was like scared. But he's into K-dramas and things like this. He loves
Wow.
he's asking me about
Is that why
K-dramas.
he was here? Or did he visit? Or?
It's virtual.
Yeah, right.
Just doing everything virtual via emails and correspondence and Zoom and things like that. But what a lovely guy to take the time to talk. And I'm not sure whether I want to, but I want to be honest about this. And while my wife was, sorry, hands on, while she doesn't listen to this, while my wife
just pause it now if you're the wife.
Yeah. She loves me, but she doesn't look at all my work. While my wife was pregnant with our son, who's our oldest child, she lost her mother during that time, and she's
I'm sorry to hear that.
Mother,
yeah.
And it was the mother had been battling cancer for quite a long time, and she lived long enough to see her daughter married, and then her younger son married, and then couldn't quite get all the way to see our son born, and it was an incredibly stressful time. And like having to go to not only hospitals but then funerals while carrying the child and going through all of that. And I sometimes wonder, how much effect that's had on our son. And then I feel kind of sorry. I don't want to feel sorry for him, because that's the wrong. I don't want to look at him with pity or sorrow. But I sometimes wonder when I hear you explain things, when I hear Robert Sapolsky, and rather than me just saying, come on, Edward, you can do this a bit better, that I think you are the way you are. And I don't know how to deal with that sometimes.
Well, you've been in Korea so long, when you start approaching your child with, come on, Edward, you do that so much better. I think that's just me. I think that's how I grew up in England. It was like, come on. Yeah, but that's the thing, though. Like, we fast-forwarded a few decades now, like the rest of us.
Yeah.
But, there are all these, like, memes going around of Asian parents. Like, it's called Asian, not Bichon. Or your sister got B, your only child now.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's an aside. But like, your wife, I feel so sad for her that she had to go through that. It sounds incredibly hard and harrowing. But, it's impossible to generalize from one case anyway. And it also depends on, how she was handling it. Because it sounds as if, the mom was sick for a long time. So it was, even though it's hard, it's expected, and usually, even though people don't necessarily say it, there's almost some kind of relief in it as well, like a death from cancer is so horrible for the person that finally they can just be at peace somewhere, you hope, and not have to be in pain anymore, not have to struggle. And yes, I think it can affect the child, but I think that children are born with the temperament they have, and then it's up to us to kind of do the best, help the child live the life that they can live with the temperament they have. And with me as well, like, I have two incredibly different children. Like, my youngest is I'm very extroverted. He's very extroverted. He talks all the time. Like, he talks even more than I do. I know.
You're great at talking, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But it's really bad. Like, my poor eldest, like, she's quite introverted, and she's very clever, but it just takes time for her to put words to it and, like, produce it. And by the time she's actually produced it, like, her little brother is already, like, gone 58 miles past the point where she was wanting to make a comment. And so they just have incredibly different needs. So my life is like, we get somewhere, and then after about 20 minutes, my daughter will be like, it's a bit much for me, Mommy. Can we go home? And then I'm like, we just got here, so you have to wait. And then after 2 hours, I'm like, okay, she's starting to dissociate. Like, her face has gone all pale. We need to go. And then the youngster's like, what do you mean? We just got here. And it's just because they have such different needs.
Yeah.
And yes, it could be due to things that happened in utero. But if you just think about, like, your wife gave them 50% of their genes and you gave them 50% of the genes, there could still be almost zero overlap in practical terms.
Yeah.
So they just turn out different, I think. But we just have to support them to build regulation and to feel safe within the boundaries that we set for them, I think.
I'm so glad that we have two children in our family, because then I'm less inclined to generalize what children are like. I think if I only had one, I would have assumed that this is what children need or do or things like that. But just as you say, the complete difference, and it's the same with our children as well, you realize that children are different and they require different things, and there's not a one-size-fits-all type approach to things. And I think that's wonderful to know that, and it helps me recognize the diversity of people in my lecture halls and my classrooms, actually. To realize that, that's a bit like Edward and that's a bit like Elizabeth. I'm now seeing my students more differently because I'm getting older as well, perhaps. When you spoke about memes, and this is kind of coming back to something earlier, which one of my favorite memes I show my students when we've done it is like, there's generations of people sort of whipping the person in front of them, this Asian parent style, like whipping them to do work. And then suddenly somebody puts up a barrier and says, I love you, you're doing great.
Yeah.
And this seems like a transformation quite recently, that saying I love you, it's a meme, but I've done it with students and they're like, yeah, like parents don't do that too much. It's seen as spoiling the child. Rather than saying I love you, it's come in with a plate of fruit and they'll put down the pears and say study hard. Like instead of saying I love you, they would give fruit or gift giving. And or the comment I would hear sometimes is, what would happen if you texted your mother like I love you right now? They would say, my mother would phone me up and like, what are you doing? Don't die. Don't commit suicide. It's or the students might even say it in English rather than Korean, because there's this. But I think love has finally entered Korean society in expressing it.
Yeah, I mean, could you explain the difference? Because I actually have a colleague who also quite recently adopted a child from Korea, and they named him Sarang.
Yeah.
And that's a form of love, right?
It means love, sarang.
Yeah. What kind of love?
It's really interesting, because I'm not sure whether love is the same thing in different cultures.
No,
For example, like in Western cultures, it was you'll know the movie Ghost with Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze.
I've not watched it yet.
But you know the movie Ghost, right? Okay. I've not seen Titanic.
I don't know if I can go on with this conversation now.
But you spend a lot of time in Western relationships trying not to say I love you. It's like, I really like you. And it's this powerful thing.
Yes.
And in Korea, it's after 3 dates, it's like, okay, boyfriend, I love you, good, let's go.
So is that kind of like a commitment point then or something? Like we both said I love you, so now we're together for real? Or
it feels like it comes out a little bit quicker in relationships. And I remember getting a letter from a student at the end of a semester after I'd only been here a while, and at the bottom it said, I love you. And I was like, I'm going to jail. Like, oh my God, I'm going to be arrested. But it was them just saying, 사랑합니다. And that is perfectly acceptable in letters from students to professors and things like that as a way of saying thank you. But amongst family members, it seems a bit less common.
I think, do you remember the expression you said that you, are you still allowed to spank children in the UK? Because it's outlawed here now.
I think spanking has been outlawed. I got caned at school.
Yeah. Oh my God. Did you go to an expensive school? Yeah. I could smell it on you. Anywho,
that's the whiskey.
you've heard the expression "spare the rod, spoil the child," right?
Yes.
And so it's only quite recently, because we're all young, right? It's very young. So it's only very recently that we moved away from that to kind of more authoritative parenting instead of authoritarian, right? But in Norway as well, I mean, here we just talked about, how hard it's been with, the war and colonization, etc., etc. But I've also thought in Norway that it was such a hard life. Norway has the second longest coast in the world, apart from Canada, and like Korea, it's filled with mountains mainly in between that coast. So there's very little sort of arable land. It's like patches of like the size of a stamp where you try to grow a carrot or potato. And so like in Korea, you had a lot of people who were fishermen farmers, and fishermen go out and they die a lot. So you had, a lot of relationship loss. You had a lot of single moms who were widowed and so on. And I think that people they can't afford so much emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I've wondered if it's the same with like a lot of in Korea, and I'm sure a lot of Asian cultures, but in a lot of the society, you can't afford so much emotion.
What does that mean, Liss?
That it's like a protective thing that you do for yourself. And of course, it comes from Confucian ideas and strictness and discipline. But those ideas, even though they come from a certain human, it's kind of like the Bible, I think, where the way that it's handled or operationalized within a society is not random, I think. And people choose to operationalize it in a psychologically beneficial way, or in a way that they feel is psychologically beneficial. And that obviously is not necessarily a conscious thing that they do, but we try to create the world or understand the world in a way that gives us a narrative that we can live with, right? And so I'm thinking in a harsh society, it's like the children dying that we talked about. If infant mortality is high, there's a different investment in children, right? And I mean, even here you say like the 100-day thing that they have, and in China as well, they celebrate the first year birthday after a year after conception, because, you know, the first trimester or first 3 months after the baby's born, that's when they're the most vulnerable, and a lot of them died. So they celebrate after 3 months. They go like, yay, we managed to keep this fetus alive for an entire year. And, you know, that's understandable, but that arose for a reason, right? And I'm thinking maybe that, yes, the way that love is expressed is based on actual sort of religious tinged cultural aspects of culture, but that those aspects of culture are also not random. I mean, you do have the same in the whole thing of like spanking children and disciplining wives. I mean, you find that in the Bible. And it's probably there because it was useful at some point, but maybe it's not so useful anymore because we live in a world where there's a scarcity of children, but they tend to grow up. So we need something different, and you see that society changes to kind of accommodate that, I think.
Do you have any views on what we should do with religion and children? Because religiosity around the world seems to be getting more scarce. We've lost our narratives almost. Now we have managers and technicians who give us statistics about 3.4.
Psychologists. We're like the new priests. Like we help people find meaning in life at a price. But, you know, I still have some sessions free that you can book on me via video, right?
So chapter 1 is capitalism versus the boob, and then the shrink versus God.
Yes.
Yes, we got it.
That is a thing, right? Because, like, who is allowed to make meaning about what's right, what's wrong, what's good for people, what's not good for people? It's increasingly not necessarily psychologists, but that kind of area of business, right?
Insta-reels as well.
Yes, that. What were you asking for?
How does the reduction in religion affect
secularization
children?
I don't know. I mean, I was interested to read, like in the papers when I arrived, that Chuseok rituals here, or the way that people uphold them, millennials are upholding them, that's changing. And, you know, I saw these women, like elderly women and men, like traveling around on their bikes with, you know, a big basket of ridiculously expensive fruit. Oh my God, I cannot believe how expensive fruit is here.
Noodles are cheap though,
yes.
But fruit,
yes. So anyway, you know, carrying around these like big fruit baskets. But then I also read online that I think like 36% said that they weren't going to spend Chuseok with their family. So they used like a Kakao Pay to send a money gift to their parent, and then they don't go home. They prefer to go on holiday abroad or something. And to me, that's unbelievable. Like as a Norwegian, I think the equivalent is if like I chose not to go to my parents' house at Christmas, and I just sent them some gifts, and I went to like Spain or something. And I mean, my parents would feel so rejected, and I would not want to miss that out, and my children would not want to miss that out. But then I thought maybe that is related to having fewer children, because Christmas is, you know, a lot of adults will be like, oh, you know, Christmas is just such a hassle. I'm not really, I don't like it anymore. But once you have kids, I mean, to me anyway, like I always thought Christmas was magical. But now, like, as soon as Halloween is over, I'm like, Christmas is coming up. Let's bake, you know? So I think that when you lose children, you also lose the kind of motivation to create rituals that include the wider family in a way. So I'm sure that is connected. And it made me feel a little bit sad. And I had this really touching moment where I actually had a skin infection. I had to go to the hospital during Chuseok. I don't recommend that because every hospital is closed. Anyway, but I'd been there and I was a bit like fuzzy-headed, and I was waiting for the tube or the metro. And this elderly couple came out, and they were like unfolding their folding bikes. At the same time, this old man is trying to carry this like, you know, fabric wrapped box of, I'm assuming, ridiculously expensive fruit.
Or spam.
Or spam.
Might be spam.
Yes. But I think I could see the corner, and it looked like a fruit basket. And then he dropped his umbrella. And I helped him pick up the umbrella because, of course, he had like the bike and he had the fruit basket. And he was like, and he actually yelled at me. Because he was so stressed. And then his wife, I don't understand Korean, but I could tell that she was saying like, she was helping you pick up your umbrella. The least you could say 감사합니다. I've never been so embarrassed at you. And he was like, oh, okay. He's like bending his head and shit. But my point is like that kind of stress that they were experiencing. They were all dressed up in like their best clothes and everything and spent money on this gift. And I could tell how important it was to them. And I just assume they're going to see their child somewhere in the nearby area, and they've traveled on the metro. And I think it's, I'm wondering what makes people make that decision to kind of deselect that because you want to go to Japan and go to like, I don't know, Disney World Japan or something. But then I was thinking that maybe that is tied to the way that they were raised, that they're kind of rejecting that way of showing affection, you know, that they don't have that kind of close emotional relationship with their parents, or, you know, the kind of sharing of personally important joy that you would have that would make you want to see your parents. On the one hand, they don't have that, and then they also don't have the children that would kind of make you want to make that longitudinal protection of rituals. So I'm sure there's positive things about it as well, because it is also a step away from women spending 58 years single frying slices of squash or something, or fish, or making fish cakes in order for male relatives to eat them while their women are in the kitchen doing all the 80,000 dishes. But maybe there's some kind of middle way where you could meet and only have the expensive fruit and maybe order the single fried squash or something.
The fruit is expensive. You're absolutely right. The fruit is outrageously expensive. When we took our children and nephew and niece to England, and we're in Tesco or something like that, and they're trying to encourage English children to eat more fruit, and so the fruit is free. Like they're giving it out. Please eat fruit. Stop eating chocolate, English kids. My kids are just standing there eating all of the fruit. And for the old people, sometimes they get here in Korea, they get a second life has become popular. This idea that now they don't have to be babysitters, or it's not like you have children and you give them to the grandparents and off you go, that now old people are also allowed to have, the second life is maybe the wrong way to describe it, but, you know, life goes on, and they're encouraged to have hobbies and interests. One of the things that I've often thought about is that I grew up kind of very close to my grandmother and shared a bedroom with her for a while, and, you know, that biological transfer of wisdom, not from a babysitter, but just sitting around someone who is your blood, your genes, or or whatever, that family relationship, that transfer of wisdom and knowledge, it's sad that that's gone. I think that 3 generations under one roof and sitting around with old people, that severance seems to be sad for me.
Yeah, I agree, and I had the same experience where I grew up next door to my paternal grandmother. We literally lived in her garden, not in a tent, but like in a house that we built in the garden.
Yeah, nice.
And my maternal grandmother, she was like a 10-minute drive away. And we used to spend, you know, weekends there a lot. And I have fond memories of both of them. They're both dead. And it is something that I just really wanted from my children. And my husband's family lives in Spain, so even more so, I want them to know my parents because they're, you know, they're available nearby. And also my mom genuinely likes children. I don't really genuinely like children. Like I like children if they're like well-behaved, fun, good-looking, smart, or if they're like fun people. But you know, some people like kids because they're Lisso. I'm not like that. But my mom, like she will play with them for hours, and you know, she loves to have them over, and she's been so caring. I really wanted my kids to have that. And I didn't really think that they would, because all my other boyfriends, poor my husband, they were all foreign. And I think my mom had just given up hope. And I came home and I was like, this is this guy you've never met. He's not my fiance. Also, I'm pregnant. And, you know, they almost fell off the chair, but they were so happy that it was Norwegian, I think. Because he was local.
And 192 centimeters and blonde with a beard.
Yeah, he could speak Norwegian. But I really want my kids to have that. And that is one of my reasons for actually staying in Stavanger, where I grew up, is so that my parents and my kids can get to know each other. But then I think that people still, I don't want to judge people who select different options
Yeah,
for their family. But I just think that I have reasons to just choose what I chose, and they also have reasons to choose what they choose. And it is interesting to look at, what drives a loss of kind of that kind of family cohesion.
And I think children keeps people together. I've noticed with family, and it's this idea of, and I love it how it keeps people together, and it gives you hope, and it lets you see the world anew, and this brilliant discovery again. It seems to happen, and I think that's a really nice thing. And it's also, I've also thought having children is quite magical, because I know a few people, and they've got apps on their phone of when they have to go home, and you have to have sex on this day, and they're taking tablets, and the stress and the pressure, and it doesn't always happen. It's not like this thing that is so easy and we should take for granted, and and miscarriages and all of these things that don't quite work, and when it does happen, we sometimes forget to say, like, what is life, and this wonderful thing that has happened.
And absolutely, I mean, I can be tired and dislike children, but it is also a privilege. And it's just hard to kind of be discussing that, I think, in public, because it can feel so disrespectful to people who chose not to have kids, as if they don't know the meaning of life. That's not kind of what I'm trying to say. But there is something to do. There's something to be said for the cohesive power of children on a societal level, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
completely with that. And I wish we heard more from just regular parents. I think it's very often that our culture will promote, different stories, and it should do, and it should allow people to feel recognized. But sometimes I feel like when I go to the just drop all my papers, when I go to the school gates and I just see regular parents there, and I'm like, I don't see you guys in media or represented. I see lots of stories about this and this and this, but the average parent, generally superstars, because it's not, we started this conversation by saying it's not easy to be a parent. Perhaps as we come towards the end of this, advice for being a parent, because I was going to ask you about recommendations, and you told me rather than books and media, you want advice for parents.
Yeah, I would recommend seeking out other parents before you have your own kids and seeing how they do it, and maybe even supporting them, because you need to pay it forward. So my best friend had kids a few years before I did. I guess 4 years before I did. I went to visit her, and she had very premature twins. I remember she was sitting there with one child under each arm, she was breastfeeding them until they were 9 months or something. And it was such a hard start because they were premature. They were like NICU babies, and she was breastfeeding them, and everything was just hard, and they woke all night and so on. And I just thought, if she can do that with 2 premature babies, I'm going to manage that one baby that I'm probably going to have in a few years. But also just being there with her, only, even we didn't live in the same place, but just visiting her regularly and being there with her when she had these kids, I thought that was so helpful. And the same thing I had friends in the UK where I lived at the time, who had kids, and they were just always around, because we were a bit like an extended family, because we were all immigrants, right? And I think that was so important to how I became a mother. And when I had our eldest, we had this girl that we knew who came in, because I said I started working early, so she was kind of looking after my daughter informally on afternoons occasionally. And I remember after being with us, for half a year, she was like, when I have kids, I really want to be the same kind of parent that you are, because it's just so relaxed to be in your house. Yes, the floor is dirty all the time, and there's dirty laundry everywhere, but your food is good and the kids are happy. And then when she did have kids, because she's now unbelievably, she's almost 30 now. I see some of those things in her. She's chosen some of the same parenting practices. She's very laid back, which is, kind of different from a lot of other, I think, women around her. And I think it just had that effect of being in our house regularly. So that was one of probably many influences that she chose to take with her as a parent. So that's my main recommendation, is to actually spend time around other parents. And be genuinely interested to the extent that you can, because children are incredibly boring to hear about when you don't have children, but try to lean in. And then the second thing is something that I said to one of these Yonsei students, who said, she thinks she might want kids, but she's just really afraid she'll be an inadequate parent. And I said, you will be the worst parent ever, but you will also be the best parent ever, and they will happen on the same day, daily. You'll be the worst and the best, and that's kind of all we can expect. So I think that's also advice, to go with your instinct, unless you feel you're not coping. If you really feel you're not coping, you should talk to someone about it. A friend, or your mom, or your mother-in-law, or some other person that's an adult that you know, or seek professional help, because I think we can't raise children alone. I'm not saying it takes a village, but it certainly takes support to make a mother and to make a parent. We don't become parents in isolation. We grow into parenthood in relationships with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chapter 3, or the third series of the book, is your food is good and your children are happy, which is a great way, but your floor is dirty. But that's exactly what parenting is about. It's like, yeah, but they're happy, they're all right, they're healthy, they're eating.
Can I interject that my own mom gave me a sign when I think we just had the one child still, but she gave me like a sign to hang in my house, and it says like, a good mother has dirty floors and happy children. And I think she kind of meant it as like a little bit of a criticism, because like she was stay at home. So like our house was always sparkling because she had nothing else to do all day except clean it. And I've always been working. So my house is a tip when when I can afford a cleaner, it's clean. If it's not, it's usually filthy. But I was like, I take that as an actually useful point of advice.
Yeah. I love it. And I just want to say something about the idea of spending time with other parents, because a lot of my friends are older than me, and a lot of my friends were having children and they were getting married. And then I found myself, because my plan was to stay a bachelor until I was 60. And
how's that going for you?
have all the fun and then marry an old lady and watch TV together, when I was 60 or something. That was my plan. I remember telling my grandmother all my plans. And then what I'm thinking of is like these ideas from René Girard, how we're just mimetic creatures, and people around us start getting married and having children, and then we think, I should also do that. And I think like if you're surrounded by people that are having children and getting married, you're more likely to do it, I think. And slowly holding babies for the first time and other people's kids, it's weird. And then you realize, I also want a little bit of that. Children are nice. Yeah, I know, because I as a father, children are nice, but they're hard.
Can I say one last thing?
Yeah.
And it is that I think that you can kind of grow into parenthood at the same time as growing as a person in other ways as well. So I think there's this cultural expectations of mothers, which I've observed both here in Korea, but also in Norway and in Western cultures, that once you're a mother, it means relinquishing everything else. But I think that was maybe different when people had their first baby when they were 17 or even 14, right? Because it really was, you went from being a child to being a mother. But now people have, what's the average age for first motherhood here? Do you know?
I would say it's probably around 32, 30,
right.
Around.
In Norway, it's like 31, I think. So you've had like 15 years of adult life where you weren't a mother. So all your coping skills and coping strategies and your identity is built around other stuff. And one of the most core things I found in my research so far, which was done partly by this master student called Frida Sætre from Denmark, is that is central to coming out of maternal depression, which is what we started talking about. It is, many of them are saying that I came out of my depression when I managed to get in touch with something that I knew was good for me, right? And I think that they need to contact that feeling of coping and that feeling of being themselves in order to kind of build their identity as being themselves as mothers. And that is something I think that we can also talk about more as a culture, how we can allow women to have the things they worked so hard for. And I think in Korea, that's especially the case. Can you imagine spending half your life in a hagwon and then being expected to give it up when you have a child? That's just, to me, as a Norwegian, it's just heartbreaking, right? But we need to be allow women to build on that at the same time as growing into being a parent, without expecting them to do all the emotional, physical, and professional labor at the same time. So it's like an inverse Kinder egg. It's like we have to build a triplet of kind of care for women so that we can support them as a society, I think.
I love Kinder eggs.
Me too. Are they allowed here?
They're not allowed in America, are they?
I know, that's
You're
so
allowed
sad.
like AK-47s, but no Kinder eggs. Yeah, they're allowed here.
Oh, good.
They're
Oh,
allowed
good.
here.
Yeah.
It's got something right, except the price of fruit. Thank you very much. This was wonderful.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun to be here.
Go. And relax. Awesome. Woohoo!
That was fun.
That was fun. That was fun. And you've got a wonderful singing voice. I bet you sing.
Thank you.
You sing when you cook, I guess.
I sing in tune,
Yeah,
if that
you
makes
do.
sense.
Yeah.
I don't have a particularly good voice because I've never been trained, but I sing in tune. I play like 4 instruments badly.
Wow.
Yeah. I didn't have Asian parents. Like if I'd had Asian parents, maybe I would have been good at one instrument.
I was just going to be casually racist and say maybe that's the Korean in you. You can just sing.